call the meeting to order. This is the November 12th, 2019 meeting of the Town Plan and Zoning Commission for the town of Fairfield. I'd like to, before we get started on the agenda, just wanted to, we just recently had an election, and wanted to thank Commissioner Meyer and Commissioner McAleese for their service. It's been 4 years for you, Chris, and 2 years for you, Commissioner Meyer. So it's been good. Thank you for your service. Really appreciate it on behalf of the commission and the town.
Thank you, Matt.
If I may add, Mr. Chairman, it has been a pleasure working with both of you, and I hope this is not the last we see of you guys.
Me too, thanks.
Excellent. And we do have two new commissioners having been elected, Kathy Braun and Lenny Brahman. And I don't know if they're here tonight or not, but we'll welcome them at our next meeting after they're sworn in on November 25th. And congratulations to the others on the commission who won their re-election. So the first item on our agenda is Bills and Communications, the meeting minutes from October 29, 2019.
I move to accept.
Motion to approve by Commissioner Corcoran.
Second.
Second by Commissioner McAleese. I'm going to give as many as I can to him tonight. Yeah. Thank you. So, any comments?
No.
No. Right. Yeah. I didn't see anything needing correction myself. Any other questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, the minutes are approved unanimously. Next is new applications to recommend to public hearing. The first is 1521 Beacon View Drive, zoning compliance application of John and Dillon LLC for a 20-unit residential development under Section 830G of the Connecticut General Statutes.
I don't have anything beyond that description, Mr. Chairman. It's an application for 20 units, as it says, and public hearing is generally required for these types of applications.
Very good.
I move that we move to public hearing.
Motion to move to public hearing by Commissioner Corcoran, second by Commissioner McAleese. Okay, so hearing's required. Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? The item is moved to public hearing unanimously. Next is old business, 1073 North Benson Road, special exception application of Fairfield University for an addition to an existing building for a student wellness center.
Okay, Fairfield University seeks to construct a 4,400 square foot addition to Jogues Hall in order to relocate their university wellness center. The one-story addition, together with the renovation of a little over 3,000 square feet of existing space within the building, will bring the wellness center to a total of 7,450 square feet. If you recall from the hearing, they're looking to relocate from Dolan Hall, which is kind of in the northern part of campus, wanting to get this center more towards where the majority of the freshman and sophomore students reside, and also expand their capacity to do mental health discussions with the students as well as physical health. So the relevant standards for consideration for special exception for this addition are, number one, is the location, type, character, and size of the use of buildings in harmony with and conform to the appropriate and orderly development of the town and neighborhood, and not hinder or discourage the use of adjacent property or impair its value. Number two is the nature and location of the use in buildings or structures such that there is adequate access for fire protection. Three, are the streets serving the proposed use adequate to carry prospective traffic with provision made for entering and leaving the property without creating undue hazard or traffic congestion. And four, is the proposed use in compliance with the plan of conservation and development. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, but that's all I have for now, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Thank you very much. I don't recall any, but were there any conditions that came up? Do you remember?
No, I don't recall any issues that arose out of this.
Right. Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Do you want a motion?
I'd like a motion, yeah.
Okay, move to approve?
Excellent. Motion to approve by Commissioner Francis. Second by Commissioner McAleese. Very good. Commissioner Francis, You-
I feel it's been well summarized. The structure will be in addition to the university and blend with our master plan. I did have one question. One of the TPZ concerns was the loading space. Did they say, no, they don't need any? Question 9.
You looking at the code minutes?
Yes.
I think we were discussing with them if there was there's a rear, the main, as they described it at the hearing, there's a main entry in the front where the loop is at Joe Exall, but towards the back, there's an emergency vehicle parking, or like an
Yes.
ambulance bay, if
Yes.
you will. We're asking if there was going to be like a walk-in entrance there.
Any other loading space? And they
Right, no, yeah, the
probably
answer
don't.
is, yeah, the answer is no, there's not.
That's, and that's
And then they want to have their,
exactly what I was
they want to have their
remembering.
walk-in entrance.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the front, right. And my other question was, you asked them about a dumpster, if they were sharing it with Jogues or having their own. And I don't know if they answered your question. And I wondered about hazardous waste, medical waste, if it's having its own dumpster too.
Yeah, I think there's
Disposal.
certain things that they might have that
Yeah.
are of smaller, not of a voluminous capacity, but I think their plan is to share the existing enclosure with what's there
Right.
presently.
And they've agreed to all your
Yes.
questions and concerns. All right, very good. Thank you.
Commissioner McAleese.
I'd like, excuse me, I like the presentation, and I like the idea that, you know, the university's been trying to update all the dorms, add community spaces, and this just seems like another logical addition to the whole package, if you will. It seemed to be harmonious with the neighborhood, no traffic issues, so I have no problem with it.
Yep. Very good. I echo those comments. Anyone else have any other comments? Otherwise complies with all our regulations. Okay. We're ready to vote? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? The application is approved unanimously. The next is coastal site plan, 224-230 Oldfield Road. Coastal site plan application of 22 Long Lots Lane LLC to develop 7 existing dwelling units, proposing a new 8-unit development in the B zone.
Okay, in addition to the comments I'm about to make, hopefully you've had an opportunity to look. I did send you an email this morning. I apologize for the tardiness of the report with an email. This application requests the redevelopment of a tract of land which presently exists as 4 separate lots and comprises a total of just under 35,000 square feet. 2 of the existing lots each contain a 2-family dwelling, and the third has a 2-family dwelling with a detached garage with an apartment above. So in the 4th parcel is basically a driveway that gets to the rear to access the 2 rear lots. So there are 7 existing dwelling units on this. The intent is to combine this into a single parcel and redevelop them from 7 units to 8. That application had a variance to the Zoning Board of Appeals in December to increase the number of dwelling units from 7 to 8, reduce the rear line setback, and increase the lot coverage and floor area modestly. There was an application in the email I sent you today, if you haven't had a chance to see it. The original application was submitted to the Zoning Board of Appeals with a coastal site plan application because the statute allows the ZBA or this commission to do a coastal site plan. The original application was withdrawn because there was some neighbor interest, and after consultation with some of the neighbors, the plan was revised at the request. They met in tried to address the conditions of the neighbors to the point where the neighbors supported the application at the Zoning Board of Appeals with a list of conditions that the applicant agreed to abide by, and which the Zoning Board of Appeals imposed. However, we, as well as the applicant, overlooked the requirement to include the coastal site plan. It got lost in the sauce with the second application. So it's before us now, or before you now, for the coastal site plan component of the overall plan. There was a public hearing in December, and there was support amongst the neighbors for that, and there's a letter that I emailed you today from the attorney representing the neighbors agreeing that, yes, this is the same plan we looked at, this is the same thing that we supported in front of the ZBA. So from the coastal site plan perspective, there really aren't any significant natural features. This property is on the north side of Old Field Road. It's kind of a flag lot that the rear property abuts the firehouse that fronts on Reef Road, so it's not, there are no sensitive coastal resources on or adjacent to the site. It is in a flood zone. That's why it is in the coastal site, the CAM boundary. The coastal site plan boundary is everything within the coastal floodplain or 1,000 feet inland of mean high tide, whichever goes farthest inland. In this case, they're in a flood zone, so they do have to comply with the AE flood zone elevation standards for the design of their structures, but there aren't any real sensitive coastal resources here like tidal wetlands or beaches and dunes or of the like. So from a coastal site plan perspective, we think it's consistent with the coastal site plan policies, and unfortunately we missed the mark and didn't require that as part of the December zoning board of appeals application, so here it is before you now. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you very much. So the PDF that we got first had the coastal site plan application, and then following that is the letter from Attorney Rizzio on behalf of his clients confirming that, what Mr. Wendt just said. Okay. So, can we have a
Motion
question for
approved.
staff? Motion? You want to make a motion and get things started here?
Oh, yes, I'll move that we move it to public hearing.
Okay. Move to public hearing.
Isn't that what we're doing?
Well, we don't have to. And I don't know that that's really necessary with this. This has been through the ringer now. One of the things I'll confirm with Mr. Wendt is whether we've had any outreach from public or any inquiries, and I think the answer to that is no. So it's a coastal site plan application, very much like we had the one on Fairfield Beach Road, where one of our alternatives is to move it to public hearing if we perceive there's a need to do so. But this is one which we typically vote on after reviewing for compliance. And if the coastal site plan application in all respects complies with our regulations, then it's really something for which a public hearing is not required. With that having been said, I would entertain a motion to get things started.
I'd move to approve.
Okay. Commissioner Levy moves to approve the application,
I'll second.
and second by Commissioner Corcoran. Okay. Now, you mentioned you had a question, Commissioner Corcoran?
Well, what criteria do we use for the site plan? I mean, the coastal site.
Well, I'll let Mr. Wendt,
Yeah, the coastal site plan, what a coastal site plan is an identification of the coastal resources that are on or adjacent to the site, and how they may be impacted by the proposal, and whether or not the identified statutory coastal resource policies for each of those resources are either addressed or mitigated. In this case, like I said, there's no beaches and dunes, there's no tidal wetlands. The obligation here is they have to be coastal site FEMA compliant, which they would have to be in any case. They have to meet the elevation standards. So the report indicates that, hey, they need to give us a little bit more detail on erosion and sedimentation control plan. But assuming that that is resolved, and we would make and it is part of the report that we sent to you today, I should say that there are a couple of recommendations that I might recommend as conditions of approval. One is that they provide more detail with respect to an erosion and sedimentation plan, and their landscaping plan needs a little bit more detail in terms of the number and size of species that they are showing. And but other than that, we think it's consistent with the coastal site plan.
Okay, thank you.
So, and I'll just add to that, if you look at the page, I don't know, 7 of the PDF, We do have a CAM review, and it speaks to the general development, sewer and water lines, and then water-dependent uses, and generally makes a determination or a representation as to whether the development is going to have an impact on the coastal resources. Right. And so if we think that it will have an impact, we need to understand that it will be mitigated, and if not, then it doesn't, and whether it complies, otherwise complies with regulations.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Noonan?
Mr. Wen, on the application, the last 2 pages, conditions of approval,
Yes.
are these part of what staff is recommending, or?
The last 2 pages, those conditions of approval were actually the conditions that the neighbors had requested of the applicant and that the applicant agreed to adhere to, and they were made conditions of the zoning board of appeals approval.
Okay, so they don't need to be done
So those
here.
already exist as conditions of the variance application.
Thank you.
I have a question too.
Yeah, Commissioner McAleese?
I guess related to that, I remember, I can't find my notes about it, but there was an issue about one of the units, I think it was number 8, they agreed to not have south-facing windows on the 2nd floor or something to
Correct.
that effect. But the elevations show them, so I'm just, is this just an example then, like, of what that type of unit, the A-type unit looks like? But we can assume safely that the south elevation is not going to have the windows?
Unit,
It looks like 8
Unit
is
8.
the bottom left one. It's the 2-story, one-story, 2-bay garage that's attached to the elevated.
right.
And I'm taking, where's the north out? So south is, I guess it's the side of the building facing the neighbor's property to the left on the drawing. It kind of goes diagonally through the house, so it's sort of hard to say. So,
Yeah, it's a weird,
but these elevations make it look like, every elevation has a window in it, so, except for the party walls. And again, I have a feeling, I answered my own question, that what they're showing is just a sample of what one of the A units looks like, but that
Yes,
actual unit is not going to have windows there?
correct. They're not showing the entirety of the building. There are 2 buildings that have
We don't have 8
a
elevations.
1-story garage attached to a 2-story portion, and there's a mirror image unit.
Right, one of the,
And similarly for the 4-unit building, they show you 2 units side by
Right.
side, and there's a mirror image of that attached to it. So just for the sake of the size of the page, they're showing you half of the, one half of the building, there's a mirror image on the other side of it. So if you look at the site plan, you'll see that Unit 1 and Unit 2 are each a 2-story residence, and then on either side of it, there's a 1-story garage. When you look at the architectural plan, they're showing you only one of those 2 units. There's a mirror image unit attached to it.
right. I'm trying to find the page. So then, look at A2.0A. It
Yes.
shows, again, I think I answered it, but just wanted to be sure I'm reading this correctly. The side elevation, the top right elevation,
Right.
would basically be the side elevation of Unit 8, which I think is the unit in question, the one facing the neighbor's property. And they're showing 2 windows
Well,
on the south.
it would also be Unit 2.
Yeah, but I'm just saying it specifically because that's the one that rule applies to. I'm assuming they're not going to have, it could also be Unit 2.
Correct.
Yeah, right, it could be
They've
Unit 2.
agreed- They've agreed that those 2 units will not have
So this is just like a generic
upper
elevation,
story windows facing
if you
south,
will.
correct.
Okay,
So those windows would be allowable on unit number 7 and unit number 2, but not on the
8.
on 8.
Okay. All right, that answers that one. And then I have another minor one that just came to light. So they can, so you have an A-type and a B-type connected there in that south unit, or I guess it's north actually, but the bottom of the page, 8 and 7.
Yes.
So 7 is to FEMA regulations with a carport, but the immediately adjacent one doesn't have a carport underneath it? Is it, I mean, what do we need to see, the high water line or something, or the,
No, the garage slab, or the first floor elevation has to be above. A garage slab can be below the flood elevation as long as everything between the slab and the flood elevation is water-resistant materials and there's flood openings for the water to flow through. So a garage slab is allowed to be below the base flood elevation as long as the materials are approved, pressure-treated lumber and materials that can be inundated without having to be replaced.
right? It just surprised me that they could be attached side by side and one is elevated, the other one is not.
Well, they'll both
Does
be
the-
elevated. It's just the garage, if you look at the,
So the second one's
an
gonna-
A2.2B, the units on the 4-unit building have that open lattice type
Right.
construction where there's a garage door and the rest of the garage is kind of open lattice. That's what unit 7 would look like.
Right, but then unit 8's gonna look more like 2.0A.
Correct.
Okay,
And that was part of the negotiation with the neighbors, is they reduced the height of those adjacent to bring the story height down, so those garages were at grade to decrease the overall height and massing of those two buildings.
and they're still okay with FEMA regulations? Because the door's only one riser off grade at that point. I mean, I know it's probably above the 12 feet,
Yeah,
but I'd be
they're-
nervous if I were close. I mean, if it meets the regs, it meets the regs, so.
Their elevation 12 is where they need to be, and they're not, this site, on the existing grades around elevation,
Yeah, we don't have any elevations on this.
it's on the,
Is it on the second
it's
one?
on the existing condition sheet. Shows grades of 10.5 and 11.
Okay, so they're a
area,
foot.
they're not very
Yeah.
far, they don't have to be very far out of the
They
ground
just have to be above it.
comply.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you.
Commissioner Levy?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, it appears that the ZBA has already addressed the substance of the application and the waivers. So in terms of the coastal site plan application, I mean, it appears that there's appropriate consideration for controlling groundwater. The property is north of Oldfield Road. It's a good distance from the marshes, so I don't see any significant impact of an environmental nature. And based upon that, subject to the applicant complying, and these might be additional conditions, providing staff with appropriate additional information for relating to erosion and sedimentation and a more detailed landscaping plan, I believe the coastal site application should be approved.
Great. So you agree to amend your motion then to add those conditions of approval?
Yes,
Okay.
regarding erosion and sedimentation, and the one regarding landscaping, yes.
Great. And Commissioner McAleese, you were seconding on that,
Yes.
right? Yeah. Okay, so you good with that? Good. Okay, thank you, Commissioner Levy. I agree with all that. Does anyone else have any other comments or questions? Okay, so the motion on the table is to approve with those two conditions. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, the coastal site plan is approved unanimously with the conditions. Excellent.
Good.
The,
Take off.
very good. All right.
Bye now.
Yeah. Thanks again, guys. So the next item on our agenda is our public hearing. I'll read all three items. They'll be handled together. It's the zoning regulation amendments, application of the Fairfield Housing Corporation to amend the design residence district regulations, which have been published. I won't read them. Number 2, 980 High Street, application of the Fairfield Housing Corporation to establish a design residence district on land presently zoned Residence B. And 980 High Street, zoning compliance application of the Fairfield Housing Authority, Fairfield Housing Corporation pertaining to a 40-unit affordable housing development pursuant to Section 830G of the Connecticut General Statutes. These items are continued. This is a continuation hearing from October 15th, 2019. Before we get started, Commissioner Levy has one item to note for the record.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, at our last meeting, October 15th, at that time we received 2 verified petitions to intervene. Since then, I have noted that perhaps over 3 years ago, I did some legal work for one of the interveners. The nature of the work was totally unrelated. The nature of the relationship and is such that I am not at all concerned that it will impact my impartiality or my ability to be fair in connection with this petition. Accordingly, I will not be recusing myself, but I do feel that for the record, that past association should be noted. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. With that, turn it over to you, Attorney Leclerc.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Brian Leclerc. I'm an attorney. I represent the Fairfield Housing Corporation. Just a couple of housekeeping matters, Mr. Chairman, before we forget to. We would waive the period for closing the hearing on this and for rendering a decision. We've discussed with staff and with counsel for the interveners. Tonight, we will be finishing our presentation. We have just 3 more witnesses to call, plus Carol Martin briefly. We've agreed with counsel for the interveners. They will not be presenting their expert witnesses tonight. That will take place in January on the 14th. That's your regularly scheduled meeting on the 14th. So there will be no need for you to call any special meetings, Mr. Chairman.
No need, I'm sorry, no need for?
Any special meetings because of the extension of time and
Right,
going into
okay.
January.
Yeah, so the applicant is waiving the deadlines.
Yes, sir.
Under the otherwise timelines of the rules. You're intending to conclude the applicant's portion this evening,
That's correct.
and you would like for us then to adjourn the hearing, continuing that until the regular scheduled hearing in January, at which point we would then open the hearing for public comment, including the interveners and anyone else that wishes to be heard, and then you would conclude
Hopefully that
thereafter.
same evening.
If
Yes.
that, that evening, yeah, right, exactly.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay?
Yes,
That's-
sir.
So I have that under, okay?
Yes.
Can we not have public hearing tonight?
Well,
People that are here?
yeah, so it does beg the question, why are we doing that?
We can have public comment tonight. I mean, we'll be completing our presentation tonight, subject to any conclusions and a rebuttal once the public comments. If there's members of the public here, I don't see why they could not comment this
It's the interveners
evening.
experts that, it's the interveners experts that,
Yes, that's correct.
okay.
Yes.
Okay.
But there are some members of the public
is
here,
there-
they can-
Okay. The interveners experts are not ready to go, is that,
Well, Mr. Green can address that, who is here, if you'd like.
Okay.
But
I just-
we've discussed not proceeding with their experts this evening, given where we are with this matter. But if there are members of the public who wish to speak,
I don't know, the other members of the public might wish to have the benefit of the interveners experts having.
I wouldn't preclude them. I wouldn't say I would argue in January that the public could not speak at that point. If there's some that
Right.
wanted to speak tonight that are here, I don't see why not taking their comments.
Yeah, okay.
It's up to you.
Could I just have some understanding of what the purpose of the extension is for? I mean, some basis for the request.
Mr. Chairman, Joel Green, for the record, representing the interveners. The basis is that there have been some discussions ongoing between the applicant and the interveners. Really began with counsel discussing this application and the possibility, I suppose, of the parties reaching some understanding on some resolution of some or all of the issues in dispute on the application. And toward that end, we had hoped to avoid certain expenses involved with producing the experts this evening. We hope to have some further discussions, and while no one has committed to anything, there have been some encouraging and meaningful discussions between the parties, and in order to avoid the expense and in order to have experts come from, including experts in the Hartford area, we were hoping that the commission would indulge us in this extension, particularly where, in the context of this present application, as the commission is aware, there is a pending appeal. The applicant has waived the time limits, and I think it's in everyone's best interest to have some dialogue.
Right. That dialogue potentially resulting in changes to the application?
Well, I suppose potentially changes to the application and potentially resolving some issues between the parties. Optimistically, all issues between the parties. So that's
I mean,
the basis of the
it's a bit of an awkward procedural position to be in right now, with the conservation having denied the application for approval in the first place, that being on appeal, and now potentially there being changes to the application. The basis of the request for the delay is potentially changes to the application. So those members of the public that I'm going to offer the opportunity to speak tonight, and who are here and who are spending their time on this cold evening coming out, may actually come and participate only to have the application changed, so that then they have to come back in January to listen to give comment again. I mean, it seems like we're spinning our wheels here.
I don't know that we're talking changes to the application at this point to resolve this matter, Mr. Chairman. So,
Okay. I mean, we all just don't like to feel like, you know, we're wasting time.
no,
Chairman,
that's
I think I want to emphasize again, no one has made any commitments of any kind at this point, but I don't think I'm going out on a limb and saying that we're all encouraged that there's been, and that there is the possibility for a meaningful dialogue.
That's fine.
And I think that really, that's...
No, I understand. I understand where we are, and I understand the basis for the request now, and I'm being sensitive to not only our staff, this commission, but also the members of the public who have come now one night. They're now here again for another night, having to keep track and pay attention and up to date on where this stands and everything, only to now be told, oh, well, I know you've come out tonight, but you're just going to come back in January when we figured out exactly what this is going to look like, and, you know, it just doesn't seem fair.
The request is not frivolous.
I understand that it's not frivolous, but it just doesn't, I'm trying to impress upon you that it's just not perceived well by folks, okay? All right?
Sure. Thank you.
So, thank you. We'll figure out how this rolls out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to begin by calling Carol Martin, Executive Director of the Fairfield Housing Authority. There are several items that you have in your packet that have been submitted since the last hearing. One is the support letter from the town's Affordable Housing Committee.
You know, before you do get started, and I noticed now that one member of the public, and I appreciate that. No, if anyone, members of the public, I want you to rest assured that you're going to have a chance to speak in January. So there are going to be tapes of this, right? So if, you know, you don't need to stay if you don't want to. You won't be prejudiced by, you know, leaving and watching this at home in the comfort of your home at your leisure, because we now understand that you don't have to speak tonight. That'll be in January, okay? So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your packet, I'll just note that you have a letter of support received from the Fairfield Affordable Housing Committee that staff did circulate. There's also a letter from an individual in support of the application that has been submitted to you as well. It's our understanding. Ms. Martin is here. There are several documents that were submitted to staff in response to staff questions that we have this evening to circulate to. She will explain to you why she submitted them to staff in response to questions, maybe walk you through them and explain what those documents are. Carol. And again, these are responses to questions that staff reached out to us with since the last hearing that Ms. Martin responded to.
Good evening. For the record, Carol Martin, manager of Fairfield Housing Corp. I also fill the role of executive director of the Fairfield Housing Authority. Staff had placed an inquiry concerning the rent structure and the income levels of the proposed development at High Street. So the first spreadsheet that's sent out was prepared by myself, and it actually was a cut and paste out of an application that we're planning to submit in November, but that's neither here nor there. But what it describes is the AMI levels related to bedroom size, number of units, the units per square feet, the proposed gross rent, utility allowances listed as appropriate per bedroom size, and then what the net rent is. So the far right column would be what the applicant would actually pay. And you know, I obviously don't know who asked the question, but certainly I'm willing to entertain any questions regarding, you know, the spreadsheet.
Commissioner Francis, apologies, I didn't see your hand up.
I've never seen all these income levels before. I've only seen 40, 60, and 80. And 40's not even here.
Correct. So this spreadsheet is part of an application for a 9% low-income housing tax credit, Commissioner, and those they deal with the federal AMI designation, which is Fairfield is part of the Bridgeport HMFA. So that's why you don't see it broken down on state area median income, which is what you would typically see in a set-aside 830G development.
And so these figures do apply to the proposed development?
Correct.
Okay.
And so when we do this, we then convert these rents and these incomes into state area median income, and we break it down between 40, 60, and 80. So in this particular case, in Fairfield, using low-income housing tax credit incomes and AMI designations, the state area median income is actually lower than the federal designation. So these numbers actually, to meet the criteria of the moratoria assigned points based on 40, 60, and 80, have to get adjusted. And so we've done that adjustment, obviously, on the affordability plan.
Is that in this report on a certain page?
What report are you holding up?
No. No, so we'll just move to that, and then I'll answer your question, which is you'd like to see the conversion, which I also have. So,
I have a question. So,
yes.
I was trying to follow what you were saying. There seems to be a lot of moving parts. But are there going to be apartments available at these rents?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. This is what's actually going to get constructed. These are the income limits that people will be screened and make sure they're certified that they meet. The second thing that I probably way too much information, but the it's titled Multifamily Tax Subsidy Project, and it talks about 2019 income limit area definitions. So the low-income housing tax credit program actually works off this document. And if you turn to, I believe it's page 6 or 7, you'll get to the Bridgeport HMFA. And that has all the income limits, you know, starting at 20% all the way up to 80% for income, max income, as well as the rent limits. And if you take a quick look, obviously, you'll see that our rents are lower than what we could max out to.
Which pages? I don't see
They're not numbered.
Not on this
Probably
page.
lost
This is
everything, yeah.
the income
It's
level.
titled Max Multifamily Tax Subsidy Project Income Limits, and then it's maximum income by household. It's in like a colored, three-color, tricolor, and it's the first page of the income limits. Bridgeport is listed as the region designation first.
Are these, is there any correlation between these two charts?
Only for you folks to understand what the maximum income is in this particular federal program. But what is most important, obviously, I think, is that our, our rents are, we're not at the max rent. We're actually a little bit below the max rent.
So under the state program, you're not at the max rent because you're using the
Correct.
federal? Right. And is that somehow documented, or is there any way to enforce that?
Enforce
Oh, I
us,
see, you need to enforce it because you're using the low-income housing credits.
correct.
Okay.
Yep. And so we're certified every year. Back to Commissioner Francis's question. So when I was putting together the application and working obviously with the Affordable Housing Committee to gain their support, obviously there's a little bit of devil's in the details. And because, in Fairfield, Westport, and many of the Fairfield County communities, the state area median income is actually less than, the regional designation. So you have to basically take the rents and the income that you're using in the tax credit program and convert it. Frankly, it's kind of like Spanish to English, but convert it to where these units would fall under an 830G application. And so, unfortunately, I only have one copy here, but I'm certain we can email this. But what I have is 80%, getting back to the tricolored chart for a second. We'll just go through one easy exercise. So 80% of area median income for a family of 4 on the Bridgeport HMFA, the maximum income limit is $82,080. So I just want to make sure everybody sees that. So 80% at state area median income for a family of 4 is $75,500. And so our 80% under the federal would only would not generate 80% under the state area median income. However, our 60% units, so if we go down to 60%, family of 4 makes $61,560. I want to make sure everybody sees that. That's the federal. So our 60% is at $61,560. The state's area median income is $60,240. So obviously the state area median income is still below 60% of federal. When we get to 40% of state area median income, we have to go down to 25% of area median income, and that's for a person of 4 at $25,650. 40% of state area median income is $40,160. So basically, our 25% units in the federal qualify for 40% at state. Our 50% of federal qualify for 60% of state, and our 60% qualifies at 80. So in a way, we're like, each tier we're down one notch to meet the state's statewide area median income. So I don't know if that confused you more, but basically because, the federal family of 4 is at 82 and we're at 75, we're a good $7,000 lower, having to use the lower number as
I understand that.
Sure.
But I have a question. So when I look at the federal chart, I don't see the 3 categories that you just listed for the state. I
Right.
see all these other categories.
Sure.
Are the rents actually going to be broken down into all of these categories or only into the state categories?
Right, so now I understand your question. I mean, I could easily put another column in here that shows state area and break it down 40. These will be the actual rents. It's just a matter of which of these apartments actually fit into the 40, 60, and 80. So I certainly could create another category for that, or
I
column.
mean, yeah, so if I could, we're just being now made privy to how the sausage is getting
Yes.
made, right? And so ultimately, there, I think, is another chart, which is how much each of this property's 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms are going to be offered at the 40, 60, and 80 mark, correct?
Correct.
No,
Okay,
that's not what I
and
heard.
we don't have that yet.
Well, I sent it over to the Affordable Housing Committee. I don't know if Jim and Emmeline ever saw it, but what I can do for you, now that I understand the question, is put another column in here, so we can add that, and I can list the state AMI right next to the federal, so that you folks know, okay, 16 of my 2-bedroom units meet the 60% AMI designation. I think that might answer your question.
No, actually, maybe it did, but I don't
Okay.
understand it yet. So what I'm getting at is, say that for the 60%, you have 16 apartments or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Are all of those apartments going to have the same rent for the same family
Yes.
size? Well, then why are we showing all these different rents that would fit in that?
Right, so
category.
you have 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units, so it would,
I mean within, well, if I look at 1-bedroom units, at the 25% and 50%, which is the first line and the fourth line, right?
yeah,
Yeah, so they have different rents, but are they in the same category for the state?
no.
Are there
These
any-
are federal.
Are there any cases where you're showing 2 federal categories that fit into the same state category?
No. So the 25%, the two that you just indicated, Commissioner Cochran, the 25% would be 40% of SAMI, not 25.
Yeah,
But it would meet the 40. And the rents would be listed. It just would be a different SAMI.
So where does the 50% fit in?
Under the 60,
Right, and then where did the 60% fit in?
under the 80.
All right, so my question is, I see,
And then where do the 80 fit in?
They would be outside of the 80%, so they'd be market rate units.
Market rate?
Yep.
Okay. and
Under
that's-
SAMI.
Got it, and so that's why that none of them overlap. I was confused by that myself.
right, so just a bit more. So if there are 3 state categories, right, I see here that there are 5 different 1-bedroom apartment units with 5 different rents.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean you will be offering them at 5 different rents or only in the 3 categories?
No, what's being offered is on this sheet.
Okay, so within the 40% category, for example, someone who qualifies for that, they might have a different rent than somebody else in that category.
That's right,
Because
because
they're
they would,
further broken down into the federal categories?
no, they would qualify for the 25% AMI category. They would be under the income.
Hold on.
So let me just word it another way. So you've got 3 federal categories with rents for each one, and you've got 5 categories here for 1-bedroom apartments with 5 different rents. So it's 3 versus 5. I don't understand if you're only renting them at 3 different rates, and there are 5 listed on the sheet, how those 5 can apply.
We're renting them at the 5 separate AMI designations. The state, in order to comply with 830G, forces you to meet the 830G standard of your rents. So when we say we're going to house folks that are at 40% AMI or less, we are going to house folks at 40% AMI or less. But the federal program requires us to use the federal designation. So those folks that are making 40% of AMI would be renting a 25% AMI or less unit.
I understand what you're saying. I don't think you've answered my question, so maybe you don't understand my question, but I think we should move on at this point.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry about that, and I'd love to answer your question as soon as, obviously, I can spend some offline time.
Follow up
Yeah.
with a question which maybe will help, because look at the 80%, 1-bedroom, 843 square feet, proposed rent, $11.72. You said the 80% was going to be at a market rate, right? So are you going to offer that unit at a market rate or at $11.72? Or is $11.72 the market rate?
1172 is what we're going to offer it. When you talk about market rate, it would be market rate under state area median income. It would be affordable under the federal designation
Okay.
and under the financing.
So now you've got somebody then who's making 120%, a couple lines down.
Yep.
One-bedroom apartment, 843 square feet. That is a proposed rent of $1,100 a month.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's market rate both in federal and state.
Okay.
So it's
So-
lower.
Yeah, so there are two things out of that. First is, why would the rent be lower for someone earning 120% of the median income than it would be for someone earning 80% of median income?
So, sorry, Chairman, which line are you on, just so I know?
No, it's okay. So 3 lines up from the bottom,
Yep,
the first 120.
one-bedroom unit, yep.
One-bedroom unit,
Mhm.
843 square feet,
Mhm.
proposed rent, $1,100
Correct,
per month.
yep,
So if you go up 1, 2, 3 lines,
Mhm.
right, to the one-bedroom apartment at 80%,
yep,
the proposed rent is $1,172. So it appears that the rent for someone who's earning less, 80%, is being charged $72 more for the one-bedroom apartment. That just doesn't seem intuitive.
sure. So Chairman, that's a great question. The market rate rents don't have utility allowances, and so if you move over to the applicant's proposed monthly rent, you'll see one is at $1,275 because it's been adjusted for $197.
So in
And the market rate rents don't receive the utility allowance, and that's because the program requires you to include utilities as a housing cost.
Right. So I asked you before whether the 80% were going to be offered at 80%. You said no. Those are going to be offered at market rate. So if you're offering them at market rate, then you're not giving utility allowances at market rate, right?
Right, so 80% of area median income, anything over state area median income is under 830G considered market rate. But the rents here, basically this program doesn't identify with 830G, right, because it's a state statute. So this federal program we list those rents and those income based on the federal designation. And so what you have before you is actually what is going to be actually rented and the incomes that people will actually qualify for. So for lack of a better word, this is how the property will operate. When it comes to 830G, to make sure that we're compliant, then we have to obviously adjust for the state area median income. But the state area median income is less, so the classifications obviously for income are higher. So I guess what I'm saying is, even though we're saying we have 32 affordable units and 8 market rate, that's based on the low-income housing tax credit program. Under 830G, we don't have 8 market rate, we have 11 market rate.
So it's just a matter of how you're going to report that to the state.
Correct,
And in practice, you're going to be following this grid.
exactly.
Okay. Was that helpful? Maybe.
75%. I still have a question, but we can move
Go
on.
ahead, go ahead.
No, I'm not.
That's
I'm not
important.
gonna-
I mean, it's up to you.
No, we can go
Okay.
ahead.
All right. Anybody else have any questions on this? Okay. Moving up, Commissioner Francis.
Now, if the number of people in the family changes as the kids age out and leave, so the income might well go down, are people evicted for making too much, or do you adjust it to market rate rent?
Right. So the affordability plan kind of describes that, but you're right, household composition changes all the time. And so no one would ever necessarily be evicted for losing household because you'd be losing income. So you could be in a 80%, and then on research, you could drop down to a 60%, and that would be okay. The other side of that conversation, though, is you could add income or add household family members that bring income, and you could go over, let's say, a market rate unit. So the way that the tax credit program handles it and the way that we've written it in the our affordability plan is to allow folks to go up to 140%, which allows for some flexibility. And that's what the federal compliance of this program allows for. And so if you do make extra income, as long as you're not 140% above the market rate, then you would not be evicted. You would still be in compliance.
What happens at 140%? You're evicted?
Well, it's not an eviction. You get a notice that you have to move. Yep.
Also known as an eviction.
We don't like to call it an eviction. Let me just say this, and I don't know if this helps, but down in Fairfield County, I've been doing this a while. We've never had anyone get to 140%, so it would be a first for sure.
I mean, yeah, it does also raise the prospect, though, that you have folks who are living in their homes, and if they do well, then you lose the lower units, and then your mix for reporting purposes can get thrown off. So, I mean, I presume you just have to manage that, right?
Well said, yeah, and that we do a lot of targeting, obviously, when we open up our wait list to market to the areas that we want to make sure we have a robust waiting list for each of these income levels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions on this topic? Commissioner Francis?
These are all affordables. They're all affordable housing, all 40 units.
70?
No, so we're proposing the affordability plan, 70% at affordable, 30% at market rate.
And I wrote this really fast. You're doing 16 two-bedrooms, 18 one-bedroom, and 6 three-bedrooms?
Correct.
Okay. So 70 will be affordable and 30% market. And you're going to give us a grid that shows how many of each are affordable?
Under the state area median income, Jim, I think, has that broken down. If the chart I just handed you.
Of your 6 three-bedrooms, 4 will be affordable and 2 will be
Correct.
market.
So Commissioner Francis, to answer your question, we have 10 units at 40%, and I'll get you the bedroom breakdown, but this is working off of the point system. So we have 10 at 40% of state area median income. We have 16 at 60% of state area median income, and we have 3 at 80%. And I can definitely get you those broken down by bedroom size.
Thank you. That's
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Sure. And as a result of my good colleagues at the Affordable Housing Committee, we did have a meeting, and I did revise our affordability plan to make it more in line with the good model that they had created. So we did resubmit a revised plan, and certainly either now or in January, whenever appropriate, happy to answer any questions on the revisions, but they're all things that the Affordable Housing Committee would like to see, and we certainly wanted to accommodate, our folks there. And
Thank
then
you.
Sorry, Chairman. The only last thing, and I know it's come up on a couple of occasions, so tonight I just want to talk a little bit, very briefly, about parking spots, number of units versus cars. We recently did open up our wait list back in June of this year for our current assets, both at Trefoil and Pine Tree. And after opening up our wait list, we had, and this is for one-bedroom folks, we only accepted 150 applicants in total. But for our one-bedroom units, now we have 40 units at Pine Tree that are one-bedroom accessible units, first floor. Of the 82 applicants that we have currently for one-bedrooms, 73% of those folks are 55 and over, which breaks down to 39 applicants 62 and over, and 21 applicants meeting the ages of 55 to 61. The other interesting, I guess, statistic that we have certainly at Pine Tree is that we currently have 41 bedroom units and 10 two-bedroom units. Our 41 bedroom units actually have a total of 17 cars, and our 10 two-bedroom units have a total of 7 cars. So I just wanted to kind of get those ratios fresh. And this is, you know, pretty typical of many of the properties that I've redeveloped. So thank you.
And that's because you require the residents to register their vehicles with the, you know, for like a you might not issue a sticker, but you ask them to register their vehicles with the building.
That's correct. The lease requires them to report their vehicles and obviously provide insurance and registration.
Yeah, okay. Very good.
Thank you very much.
Any question, Commissioner Corcoran?
Yes. I just wanted to ask this while you're here.
Sure.
This application is by the Fairfield Housing Corporation, and I'm looking at the statement of use. But a lot of the information refers instead to the authority, Fairfield Housing Authority. So how are the two related? And for example, it says that the authority controls these other units, but the corporation controls the High Street units. Could you explain what the relationship is between the applicant and the other entity being described?
Sure. So the Fairfield Housing Authority is the sole member of Fairfield Housing Corp. Fairfield Housing Corp is the development arm of the Housing Authority. 2 of the Board of Directors are also Board of Commissioners. So that's the relationship. The Fairfield Housing Authority owns the land at Pine Tree and provided a long-term ground lease to the limited partnership. The limited partnership has a general partner and a limited partner. The limited partner is a corporate investor. The general partner is an LLC whose sole member is the Fairfield Housing Corp. So the Housing Authority leases the land to a partnership. This is under this program that I'm talking about. It leases it to a partnership. The Fairfield Housing Corp becomes the sole member of the general partner. So the program and the way it works is corporate investors come in, they're a limited partner, they bring the equity up front to construct the asset, they leave after 15 years, and then it reverts back to, in this case, the Fairfield Housing Corp or the Fairfield Housing Authority. So it's a way to get tax credit or corporate equity in, but never relinquish ownership of the property. 980 High Street is different. Fairfield Housing Corp actually owns the property. Fairfield Housing Corp, through the low-income housing tax credit program, will set up a limited partnership. The Fairfield Housing Corp will be the sole member of the general partner, and we'll have to attract a tax credit investor as the limited partner.
Okay. So now we're talking about 980 High Street.
Correct.
Okay. So take a couple steps back and let's dig in a little bit more on that. The Housing Corp owns the land and is going to form a limited partnership. Who are the members of the limited partnership?
So right now, we haven't set up a limited partnership, but we have to do that before we apply for tax credits. So moving forward, after we get through the land use approvals and have the right to construct, we will set up a limited partnership. Fairfield Housing Corp will be the stand holder of the limited partner, and will also create an LLC that the Fairfield Housing Corp will be controlling of the general partner. So the Fairfield Housing Corp will be on both sides of the transaction. Once we get a corporate investor, which we hope to attract, Fairfield Housing Corp will relinquish their interests and have a substitute limited partner, which right now, obviously, we don't know who that will be. But in the partnership agreement, after we've delivered the, the return that they expect over the 10 or 15 years, the limited partner will exit the deal, and the Fairfield Housing Corporation will step back in and purchase the limited partner's interest.
And so the Housing Corp is going to be the general partner of the limited partnership?
They'll be the sole member of a general partner. We typically set up an LLC.
The sole members of an LLC.
Correct.
A limited partnership has limited partners and general partners.
Correct.
Right? So of the limited partnership, if I'm hearing you correctly, the Housing Corp is going to be the general partner, and the investors are going to be the limited partners?
Not exactly. The general partner will be an LLC who has one member, the Fairfield Housing Corp.
The Fairfield Housing Authority.
Fairfield Housing Corp.
Okay. That will be the general partner.
Correct.
Okay. And who will be the limited partners?
Fairfield Housing Corp. will be set up initially when we set up the partnership as the limited partner, but they'll only be in it for a short period of time, because in order to get the federal tax credit equity into the project, there has to be, the investor will substitute. So the Fairfield Housing Corp. will remove themselves as limited partner,
They'll get bought
and
out.
someone, whoever it is, will step in.
Right. So the investor will buy Housing Corp's interest in
Correct.
the limited partnership in exchange for some formula of return that they hope to achieve on the investment. Once that's achieved, then Housing Corp, the interests revert to Housing Corp.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
And I'm correct now, there's no investor for the project at the moment?
No. No. It's too early. We typically wouldn't engage an investor until we know that we're submitting a financing application for the
Right.
credits, because the markets move. So, if you're out 6 months, the value of the tax credit will change.
Yeah, approved plan, you need an approved plan and everything all sort of buttoned up in order to go to market to get them right.
Correct.
So how does the delay in our proceedings from October to November to January affect your position in the market with respect to finding an investor?
Right. So once a year, I have the opportunity to get these tax credits, and that this year was November 6th. So obviously we couldn't make that, so we're now hoping to apply for November 6th, 2020 tax credits.
Oh, I see.
We have 1 year.
So at this stage, miss the window, and if it was January, February, March, like it doesn't really impact you.
Correct. With the caveat, and this is actually a good story, but Pine Tree didn't get tax credits, and certainly to credit to you folks that got us through local zoning to meet the application deadline for Pine Tree, so I'm grateful. But we didn't get the tax credits, but back to the state found another way to finance it. So although we didn't get the tax credits, we had financing lined up by April of the following year.
Sure.
So, the state's interested in investing here in housing.
I see. Why didn't we get the tax credits on Pine Tree?
It's a competitive process, and there were several other projects in Fairfield County that were competing for the credits. So just to give you an idea, there's probably 25 applications that come in and 5 or 6 get funded.
I see. So the tax credits are not, as of right, if you meet all the qualifications, you simply, you get the tax credit, like most of us are likely familiar with.
Sure.
This is a competitive process by which the tax credits are awarded. And what is it, like a committee that reviews the applications and makes the determination?
Yes, you line up under the qualified allocation plan, you're scored. And so, you can have an application that's really good, but be up against some stiff competition and not get awarded, versus going into a round where maybe the applications aren't as strong and you would get funded.
All right. So is there an alternative here to your strategy for financing if you don't get the credits here?
Sure, we would look to, go into it as a matter of right, to use your words, Chairman, which is accurate. We'd like to do it as a 4% tax exempt bond financing, which is the same instrument we used for Pine Tree.
I see. Excellent. Okay. Anyone else have any other questions on this? Yes, Commissioner Corcoran.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the housing authority. How is that related to the town of Fairfield?
Okay. So the, the Fairfield Housing Authority is separate from the town of Fairfield. The only relationship we have is the first selectman appoints my board of commissioners, and they serve 5-year terms. So every year, the first selectman has to appoint a commissioner of the housing authority.
And is that commissioner then, how is it tied to Fairfield? I mean, are all your projects Fairfield?
Well, the commissioners all have to be a resident of Fairfield, and one of the commissioners has to be a resident of one of our properties that we operate.
Do your investments have to be in Fairfield?
The Fairfield Housing Authority's work has to be in Fairfield, yes.
And is that true of the Housing Corporation as well?
No.
Okay, so it builds things in other towns then?
The Fairfield Housing Corp hasn't built anything other than what we did in Fairfield, but certainly our mission is to explore opportunities in Fairfield County. But we haven't had the ability, obviously, to do anything.
Wait a minute, so the
beyond
authority
Fairfield.
is charged by the town of Fairfield, but they are the sole member of the corporation?
Correct.
So that they sort of change their mission from being exclusively Fairfield to Fairfield County when it moves from the authority down to the corporation?
Yeah, no, the Fairfield Housing Authority hasn't changed its mission. Its mission is carved in state statute. So in order to develop affordable housing and get access to funding that a housing authority wouldn't have access to, housing authorities typically set up nonprofit development arms.
Right, I think Commissioner Corcoran's question really goes to, once you set up that nonprofit development arm of what is otherwise a political body, the Housing Authority, whose mission is to develop affordable housing in the town of Fairfield, you've now said that the Housing Corp, of which the Housing Authority is the sole member, could build affordable housing anyway. It intends to build affordable housing in Fairfield County at large and not focused on the town of Fairfield exclusively. Is that right?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. Do you see how that might strike some as being problematic?
That the Fairfield Housing Corporation wants to explore housing opportunities in other communities. I'm not sure why that would be a problem. I mean, right now, my list is filled with folks from Easton and Weston. It's important that every community has affordable housing, or otherwise the folks that are developing affordable housing, they're just locating it in one community. You're, concentrating it. So if my wait lists have families from Weston and Easton on it, and they want to live in Weston and Easton, but they can't because there's no affordable housing, they're going to be on my wait list, and they're going to be leasing up, Fairfield apartments. So, the corporation sees affordable housing not just as a zip code specific issue, we really see it as a regional and county issue. But to that end, it really comes down to where the land is available, as you know.
Yeah, I do. And I don't mean it problematic in the sense of not serving the needs of affordable housing in other communities. Certainly that's laudable, and everybody recognizes that has to happen. I think more to the point, the sole member of that now nonprofit is the town of Fairfield Housing Authority, which is run by a commission that is appointed by the town of Fairfield's first selectman. And those public servants for the town of Fairfield are now have an ethical and a legal obligation to the Housing Corp to explore housing in other towns. They're not, their role is not focused on serving the town of Fairfield.
Yeah, the corporation's board is separate from the Fairfield Housing Authority board, so I want to be clear about that. And the Fairfield Housing Corp doesn't compete with the Fairfield Housing Authority. Fairfield Housing Corp actually gives the Fairfield Housing Authority a greater ability to create units in Fairfield. If there's no land in Fairfield, the Fairfield Housing Corp obviously would go into other communities where
Yeah.
we've been invited to try to help those communities develop affordable housing.
And at the end of the day, when the investor gets paid their return and the housing corp steps back in and sort of swaps out their interest, then housing corp is going to own the lease. Is it the lease from the housing authority? No, the housing corp owns the land.
Correct.
Okay. So it's not owned by, so the land here is not owned by a town body.
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah.
And nor was any town funds or Fairfield Housing Authority funds used to purchase the property.
Gotcha.
But the Fairfield Housing Authority is the sole shareholder of the Fairfield Housing Corp.
It's not a share relationship, but
They're the
there's
sole
only
member.
one member of the Fairfield Housing Corp, and that is the Fairfield Housing Authority. So there's an operating
What is
corp.
it, what is it organized under? Is it a nonprofit corporation?
Correct.
Okay, so a non-stock corporation?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
I
it's
didn't
not-
want to get hung up
No,
in
no,
the,
that's fine,
but
but
we're not
that's-
selling shares.
No,
Yeah.
no, that,
I like that thought, though.
no,
Might generate
okay,
more money.
non-stock, non-stocks go, they refer to them as members.
Right. Okay. Yep, Commissioner Borges. I think I did not realize this until right now, and I think it is important to understand for us in the public.
So I'm just stating what I'm hearing, and it sounds like the town of Fairfield decided to create a housing authority in order to create affordable housing in Fairfield, but that authority has sort of, even though it was created for Fairfield, has moved on to other towns, but while it's still operating under the original Fairfield authority.
Right, okay, so the Fairfield Housing Authority was created in 1964. This federal program that I'm talking about today was created in 1986. So the Fairfield Housing Authority cannot apply for these tax credits. So the $18 million that came in to construct Pine Tree was done because the leadership of the Fairfield Housing Authority, my volunteer board, decided to create an entity to get access to these tax credits. So I really want to be clear that the genesis of the corporation's focus is exactly to the mission of the Fairfield Housing Authority, with the caveat that it's opening up other financing opportunities to create affordable housing. Without that 501c3, Pine Tree could not have been redeveloped under the low-income housing tax credit program.
What I'm commenting, that all sounds, laudable, but what I'm focusing on is that it sounds like originally Fairfield put in place a plan to create affordable housing or elderly housing or whatever it was in the year it was set up in Fairfield, but that, and even though the commissioners are still appointed by Fairfield, it's now providing services to other towns.
Well, first of all, we're not providing any services to any towns at this point.
Well, I mean, in terms of providing low-income housing or affordable housing. for
Right,
those
the
towns.
only work the Fairfield Housing Corp has done is in Fairfield. The first project was the refinancing at Trefoil. The second project was the redevelopment of Pine Tree, and hopefully the third project will be 980 High Street.
Okay. Well, I don't have any more questions at this time on this subject. Do you? Anyone?
If if you were to develop housing if the Fairfield Housing Corporation were to develop housing in Easton.
In where?
Easton,
Easton, I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
it wouldn't be with the Fairfield Housing Authority, it would just be the corporation, and you would form an Easton.
That's right. The Fairfield Housing Authority could not go into Easton and construct units. That's correct. It would have to be, if the Fairfield Housing Corp chose to go into Easton or were invited to go into Easton to help that community build some affordable housing, the Fairfield Housing Corp could go in and do that. State law would not allow the Fairfield Housing Authority to go in and do that.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I have one more question.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, we can talk about this all night. Go ahead.
Right.
No,
There's
no,
two of
please
us.
go ahead.
So a last piece of this. So again, I'm sort of on my theme of, it seems to me that it's a Fairfield activity that is expanded to other towns. Is there any kind of fees or profits generated through this project that ends up in a pool that's applicable to all the towns that might be involved?
Sure. So the Fairfield Housing Corp, like any nonprofit corp that develops under low-income housing tax credits, earns a developer fee. And so then they typically, a nonprofit takes that fee and rolls it obviously into their next mission-driven project. So the funds that were earned to redevelop Pine Tree were the funds used to purchase 980 High Street.
And the funds that you're going to earn as a developer of High Street could then be used to go buy property in Easton?
It could be if the Fairfield Housing Corp decided to do that, or it could be into another development in Fairfield. But that really comes down to land becoming available. Without land, obviously, there's no housing.
So who's paying the Fairfield Housing Corp's developer fee? Who's paying that?
The tax credit investors.
That's part of the business plan proposal.
The
that
negotiations.
That you go out to market with, let's say it's whatever numbers. Say it's $1 million, your fee is $100,000, right? That's the investor. So that's none of that fee is coming from the citizens of the town of Fairfield.
Correct. And that's why it's been a really successful program, because you're taking profits or equity, investing it into local communities to do some good in exchange for those corporations getting tax benefits and shelters over a 10-year period. It's very, very successful.
Mm-hmm.
And to the best of my knowledge, I believe Pine Tree was the first project in Fairfield using, low-income housing tax credits.
Mm-hmm. So, I said we'd talk about this later, but if the Easton Housing Authority identified an opportunity in Easton to build an affordable housing development, why wouldn't the Easton Housing Authority form the Easton Housing Corp to go out and buy the land in Easton to simply do it for themselves? Why are our appointed board members, commissioners who are on the Fairfield Housing Authority, who are also on the board of the Fairfield Housing Corp, why are they doing that work in other towns, for other towns?
First of all, we're not working in other towns. The question was, what's the mission of the Fairfield Housing Corp? And that is to explore opportunities to develop affordable housing in Fairfield and in Fairfield County.
Right.
So we haven't done anything. Second, Chairman, you're spot on. Why isn't there an Easton Housing Authority developing affordable housing in Easton? That's a really good question. So, more to follow, but I don't have an answer to that. But if the town of Easton came to the Fairfield Housing Corp and asked them to help us, rather than just creating another instrument that has no capital.
I think, yeah, and I don't mean to cut you off, but I think part of the confusion here is the naming convention, okay? I mean, properly, the corp should be Affordable Housing Development Corp. It's a nonprofit, right? But the way the naming conventions are structured, gives the appearances that it is a Fairfield, a town of Fairfield entity, which is focused on constructing affordable housing developments within and exclusively within the town of Fairfield. And I think that's what's sort of striking some of us differently, and that's why none of us knew any of this. Commissioner Levy?
Just one last comment to move beyond the sort of local and regional concerns. If the Fairfield Housing Corporation were at some future date to develop property in Easton, Fairfield residents who would otherwise qualify would be eligible to apply for those apartments, correct?
Sure.
Thank you.
And same with Easton residents, right? I mean, Easton residents can come and apply for it and become a resident of Fairfield.
And they do.
Right?
And they do.
I mean, it's,
Indeed.
I get it. Yeah.
Works both ways.
I mean, just to be clear, my line of inquiry was really focused on the public servants,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's a nonprofit entity. That there are nonprofit affordable housing developers. We've seen quite a few, and we've seen for-profit. But my line of inquiry was more on the public servants who are appointed by the town, by the first selectman to serve on a town commission, and that now suddenly have obligations to a nonprofit corporate real estate development company that has, as part of its mission, work outside the town of Fairfield. That kind of encapsulates my own
Chairman, there's
line.
no liability to the Fairfield Housing Authority for what the corp does. They're completely
Not
separate
liability.
entities.
Liability is not actually my concern. As an elected public official, my loyalty, my oath, my duty is to the town of Fairfield. My time is spent on this board to the citizens, representing the citizens of the town of Fairfield. I don't have an obligation to the town of Easton. My obligations are not split in some way to thinking about developing zoning regulations in Easton for something. That's what I'm trying to divine.
Right,
through
so all of the 2 board members that volunteer their time to sit at the Fairfield Housing Authority, they're fulfilling their mission as the Fairfield Housing Authority. 2 of those commissioners also serve on the Fairfield Housing Corp. They serve both uncompensated. The Fairfield Housing Corp's responsibility, obviously, is to develop and create affordable housing.
Right.
And that's our job. So they're not competing against each other. They're actually trying to supplement the activities.
Sure, and that's, and I think I understand that. Is it an obligation of an appointed commissioner of the Fairfield Housing Authority to also sit on the board of the Fairfield Housing Corp?
An obligation?
Yes. Are you required? When,
No.
when you're appointed to be a commissioner on the Fairfield Housing Authority, is it also
No.
expected that you will sit on the board of?
No, I would hope I would get 2 volunteers because obviously the corp wouldn't be able to function without it, but no, it's not obligated. Nor is when they are appointed as Fairfield Housing Authority Commissioner, they're obligated to do anything other than sit on the authority. These were folks that really understand what the problem is, with affordable housing here.
Sure.
So.
Okay. I'll find out more about this as well. We've gone, I think.
Thank you.
Good? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This project, to continue where we left off last time, we've also worked with Bill Kenny. He's a certified professional wetland scientist, a soil scientist with over 25 years of experience, a graduate degree from Yale, master's in environmental management with William Kenny Associates of Fairfield. I'd like to call upon Mr. Kenny to begin by telling us about his education, training, and experience, and providing an overview regarding his work in connection with this site.
Do we have this one in our little maps? Yeah.
Good evening. I am Bill Kenny, principal of William Kenny Associates here in Fairfield. I'm a professional landscape architect, wetland scientist, and soil scientist, and have a degree in environmental management from the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. We were retained to help with this project in a number of ways. One as the ecologist, wetland scientist, where we went out and surveyed the property, identified where wetlands were on the property, assessed the conditions of those wetlands and other ecological features on the property. And then we were also hired as the landscape architect to help with the design of the project. And so between the ecology and the landscape architecture, worked with the design team to come up with a project that we believe we conclude as professionals does not adversely affect the wetlands that are on the property. And also with the landscape architecture, we developed a planting plan that has a number of components that I'd like to review with you this evening. First, maybe a quick recap of some of the property features. It's 2.5 acre property. It's rectangular in shape. High Street is on the northwest end of the property. It extends back. Under existing conditions, there's the house and a barn or detached garage, asphalt driveway in the western portion of the property. That's about the first third of the property, and it's grass and ornamental plantings. Second third or central third of the property is a rough, what I want to call a rough lawn. It's mown throughout the summer, not quite like your front lawn, but it's nonetheless a lawn area in the central portion of the property. And then the last third of the property is a forested area where the wetland exists. Wetland is about 1/10 of an acre. It is in the bottom corner of the lot here. The lot is pitches from the left to the right, and it's a relatively gentle slope, about 2.5% on average. It drops about 12 to 13 feet from the left to the right across that property. The site does not have bedrock outcrops or things like that. The soil is relatively deep. Property surrounded by residential properties. Summary of some of the environmental enhancements that are involved with this project to help protect the wetlands include a very extensive stormwater management plan, which you heard about at the last meeting. And there is a 90-foot regulated upland review area that surrounds this wetland according to the town wetland regulations. And that area is shown on our drawing. There's a boundary in red. And we are protecting about 95% of that area will remain naturalized. And I would say on average, around the wetland, we're providing about a 100-foot naturalized buffer. We're removing lawn from that buffer area, so we're increasing the amount of naturalized plantings and removing lawn from that area. Some of the improvements, it's about 5% of improvements. One is about 100 square feet of sidewalk that is within that 90-foot area. So it's about the size of this length of table here. And another is a lawn area, about 1,200 square feet of lawn that remains within that 90 feet. So with that said, then I would like to just review with you some of the highlights of the landscape plan. There's 4 major types of features within the landscape plan. One is what I want to call ecological design, and that is occurring within the regulated area. And as I talked about, we remove lawn area, so we're replacing that with native ground cover, native shrubs, native trees, and essentially restoring the forest in that area over time where we remove lawn. Second, throughout the remainder of the project, we are primarily using native plants, except for in some situations where the natives really wouldn't function well, and that being some screening, evergreen screening trees that I'll talk about shortly. So, improving the habitat through the use of the native plants, improving water quality by removing the lawn within the 90 feet of the wetland, and then, and so that is the focus of the ecological component. Second thing I'd like to review with you is some screening that we're proposing around the perimeter of the property where it abuts residential properties. So on the eastern end, this woodland itself is a great screen. It's more than 100 feet wide, so we have excellent buffering on this eastern end. To the north and to the south, it's a narrower area, so we are proposing a double level of screening. It includes a 6-foot-high privacy fence. I'd like to pass out, I'll just have some photos of what this would look like. So to the north and the south, it'll have this double layer, be a 6-foot-high privacy fence, and then just inside of that would be a continuous hedge of evergreen trees. We're using a green giant arborvitae at this location. One, the deer tend not to browse this too heavily. Two, it can be sheared and be relatively narrow. We met with we extended invitations to all the neighbors that abut the property and met with many of those neighbors to review this proposal for screening and buffering along the property line. The picture of the evergreen planting I'm showing there is from the small park that's in the neighborhood. That is the Carolee Park on the corner of Hunyadi and Jennings, down by the fire department. So you can see the taller evergreens in there are the evergreens we're proposing here. Where there's some gaps, that's a different tree that we're not proposing. So
How tall are these?
in that photo, those are probably 20, 25 feet.
Yeah, they're pretty big.
Yeah, this grows 3 feet a year once it gets going. The first year or two, it won't, as it adjusts after it's been planted, it won't grow too quickly. But within 5 years, I expect be 15 feet of evergreen screen, and they'll grow to be 30 feet tall.
And how tall are the plantings you're going to install? How
At
how
the time
tall
of
will-
installation, 6 to 8 feet tall.
Can I ask, so are these planted along the fence, or are these in a place where there is no fence?
Along the fence. So it'll be a double, first, the fence will be on the outside of the property line, and then just inside, well, the fence would be inside the property line.
And how far is it from the fence to the wall of the building?
I'm sorry?
This is along the back of the buildings?
Yes.
So what is the distance from the fence to the back of the building?
Out to the back, 15 feet.
And how wide do the trees get?
The trees, we will be maintained at about 5 feet. They can grow 12 feet wide. I've seen them sheared 3 to 4 feet wide. So they can be sheared and they'll be maintained at a width to allow for proper maintenance and access behind the building.
So, okay.
I mean, other
Really,
options
only
are,
4 feet?
like, one reason we didn't use spruce trees is that they don't shear as well and they would grow much, much wider, the spruce trees.
Good. Commissioner Levy.
Yeah, on the north side of the property where there's an existing stone wall, will there also be a fence there or not?
Yes. And so there'll be first the wall, then the fence, then the green giant arborvitae.
Thank you.
So those the two type of areas. The first two, the ecological design, then the screening on the north and the south, and then on the very west end where we have the streetscape, that's the third area of planting. And so we're showing more of a real New England traditional open space with a front yard type of landscape with just shade trees along the street. So we'll be adding shade trees. There's an existing freestanding fieldstone wall in the east here, and we'll be extending that wall across the front along the property line. The last type of planting would be what I want to call architectural or foundation planting, and this will be in the interior of the project. And I just brought along one picture from Pine Tree to give you an example. It'll be very similar to what's at Pine Tree. So we'll have trees and shrubs and ground cover in relatively small planting beds between the parking and the buildings. We are showing 5 trees within the parking area, so 1 for every 10 parking spaces. And that's the extent of what I was planning to speak with you about and be pleased to answer any more questions that you might have.
Where is this picture from?
Yeah.
So that's from Pine Tree.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So it'd be very similar to that.
Is there any open area for where children could play?
There is there's not an extensive yard area, so we're as far as a large lawn area or something like that. There's a turnaround area, vegetated turnaround area here at the end here, and there is a community building, but otherwise it'd be some lawn and closer out to by High Street, but it's primarily living space and parking. There is a fence. We had thought early on about providing a walking path through the natural area, but that will be protected, and through the wetland agency preferred that although they did deny this, one thing was that they weren't interested in allowing for use of that area, so we removed that part of the proposal.
They were not interested.
That's right, and we've got a split rail fence between the parking in that area to
Inhibit people.
right.
Okay. Any questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Bill, in your professional opinion, does this project as presented have any adverse impact on wetlands or watercourses?
No, it does not.
And also, can you confirm that there's a proposal by the applicant for a 0.8 acre conservation easement that encompasses much of the upland review area?
Yes, that's correct.
And you've evaluated impacts to other natural resources such as animals, correct?
Yes.
Did you find the proposed soil erosion and sediment control measures for the construction phase to be appropriate?
Yes.
Do you have an opinion regarding the ability of the proposed underground detention and infiltration systems in rain gardens to treat in accordance with the 2004 Connecticut Stormwater Quality Manual?
Yes, I believe that it's been designed appropriately and will successfully manage stormwater and thereby avoid impacting the wetlands.
Are the applicable conditions set forth in both the statutes as well as the regulations of Connecticut state agencies satisfied?
That's my understanding, yes.
And do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of certainty as to whether this project as proposed will adversely impact public health, safety, or welfare, or raise a substantial public safety issue?
It's my opinion that it will not.
And do you have an opinion as to whether the development as proposed will protect the environment?
Yes, it's my opinion that it will protect the environment.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions of Mr. Kenny?
Anyone?
No.
Thank you. We've also had a peer review performed of Mr. Kenny's work. You have that in the packet submitted last hearing. It's on the CDs we provided. And it was by Chris Allen. He's a second soil scientist. What a peer review is, again, that's a review by a peer of Mr. Kenny, as someone who's equivalently trained and experienced, to basically look at what he came up with and tell us, as the client, the Housing Corporation, is this right? Do you agree with this? It's excuse me, a little bit of allergies with the leaves, to see how he opines compared with what Mr. Kenny came up with. It's a little unusual, but we felt it was important. And as you'll see, he found in his brief report, Mr. Kenny's characterizations of the wetland resources and the site resources were accurate. He felt that the delineation of the wetland, the area where he believes the wetlands are and where he marked the wetland, was accurate. He agreed that the development will have no impact to the wetland as defined. He agreed with the characterization of the site's ecological communities. He found the soil erosion and sediment control measures to be appropriate, and he found that there would be no direct wetland impacts associated with the development. And finally, he found that any activity proposed in the upland review area will have no effect on the wetland or any adverse impact on the wetlands or watercourses. And that's all in his peer review report that you have in the record as well. As you know, this site was historically used as a farm. The old farmhouse is there, as is one of the barns. And our client commissioned a study by an environmental professional a year ago after they acquired this property because of that. And they wanted to fully investigate the property to see exactly what was on the property because there has been historic pesticide use with certain farms in Connecticut, and they felt it was appropriate, even though this has not been a farm for decades, to find out what may have been around the barn or around that property. So we hired and retained Jay Soltis to perform an evaluation, and I'm going to call upon Mr. Soltis this evening. He's an LEP, a licensed environmental professional, and he submitted both a Phase 1 report, which is a very large report that you have, dated October 2018, and he's going to comment on what that is. He's going to talk about the historic pesticide use that he did find on this site, where they are, at what depths. He's going to tell you a little bit about pollutant mobility and what that means. And he's going to talk about how that's going to be handled on the site with the development.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Soltis.
Thanks. Before you just, if I may just ask you a question. It actually kind of follows up on the questions we were asking before. There's a lot of experts, a lot of work that's gone into this for quite a while now. The Fairfield Housing Authority is the sole member of the Fairfield Housing Corp.
Correct.
Where are the resources, the money, the dollars, coming from to fund the Fairfield Housing Corp? To pay, for example, for Mr. Kelly and all of these experts and single, double check, triple check work?
I'll let Carol Martin address that question, Mr. Chairman.
We don't let our land use attorneys know how we finance things. So when the Fairfield
Because we don't have an investor yet. So now it's, I'm just kind of thinking through this stuff.
Sure,
and,
no, valid question, Chairman. So we talked about the developer fee. So some of the developer fee went to purchase the land. Some of the developer fee was committed to pre-development costs. So, and I think my budget's probably blown on the legal expenses by now. So.
Right. So, and but you don't have an investor yet, though.
Yeah.
So these funds are simply on account?
Fairfield Housing Corp. Received a developer fee.
From who?
The transaction, the partnership developing Pine Tree. We took some of that money, bought the land, have some of it in the bank for pre-development funding.
So you reserved some from that transaction. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Soltis?
No, not really. Good evening. For the record, I'm Jay Soltis. I'm a licensed environmental professional with GeoQuest with offices in Fairfield and Bloomfield. As Attorney LeClaire mentioned,
Can you just pull your microphone up a little bit?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
we completed a Phase 1 environmental site assessment about a year ago. And if you're not familiar with that process, it's mainly investigating the history of the property and looking for any environmental concerns. And one of the big things we do is we look for recognized environmental conditions, which is a release or a threat of release to the environment. And typically this is for industrial commercial properties where you're looking for things like underground tanks and things like that. So the Phase 1 was completed. We did not identify any recognized environmental conditions, but we did identify the historical agricultural use and the potential presence of lead paint on the site buildings as environmental concerns. We initially did some testing. We focused on the field areas just because that's a bigger problem to deal with spatially than buildings around the buildings themselves. We did follow-up sampling around all the structures, the barn structure, the garage, the house, the shed, and we did identify what are called organochlorine pesticides, which are typical 1950s pesticides: chlordane, toxaphene, dieldrin, all the DDTs, and all the other D words. We identified those out there in shallow soil, and what was mentioned earlier with pollutant mobility is the good and bad thing about these organochlorine pesticides is that they're extremely stable and they're very immobile. So we typically, even in farmlands, we typically find them in the upper 18 inches of soil. So when we tested around the buildings, we did find both lead and the pesticides in shallow soil around the structures. And that was basically the result, the findings from our sampling program that was completed out there. Based on that, we put together a soil management plan that will be used during construction that would basically consist of digging the material out, hauling it off site. Any material that comes into the site either has to be certified clean or gets tested prior to coming on the site to make sure there's nothing in it. And we selected that. There are some options with pesticides. It's one of the few things, you don't have this option with lead, but with pesticides, DEP will actually allow you to blend it in and dilute it essentially. You're not allowed to do that with most things, but DEP recognizes this stuff was applied legally at the time. Historically, everybody applied this stuff around houses and in fields, so they allow that. But the authority, the housing authority in this instance, has decided that they'd rather, there's not a lot of it, it's shallow, it's relatively easy for us to manage. So that's the remediation plan for the site around the buildings. And what would happen is after we remove the soil, we'll do some follow-up sampling to confirm it, and then move on from there with the development phase.
Okay. Question? Commissioner Francis? I think Attorney Leclerc, Commissioner Francis has a question.
Yeah, right.
Around the buildings, what do you mean, to be the proposed buildings or the existing?
No, this is all existing, yeah.
Well, once you take down the existing buildings, you have much larger footprints of proposed buildings. And if you found contaminants, what's that word you used for, to describe the chemicals?
Oh, the pesticides, organochlorine? Yeah, it's just the historical pesticides, that's what they refer to them as. It will be gone before any
Well, if they're all over the
development.
site, are you removing 18 inches of soil all over the site?
No, this is focused around the building. When we tested the agricultural fields, we didn't find anything. We found trace levels. There was almost nothing.
All right.
But around the buildings, there was contamination that was above the residential criteria that DEP established. So that's the material that
I wonder why there wasn't any in the historically agricultural area.
We see that fairly often. I mean, it's a lot of residential use. I mean, you see this even in just houses, the non-agricultural use where people just sprinkle it around their houses to keep ants, roaches, whatever out.
Good.
And what's interesting, I guess, to emphasize here is this doesn't volatilize. Some chemicals, a trichloroethylene or something, in an old industrial cleaning solvent we see around New England, that volatilizes, eventually just vapors away, if that's a non-technical way to look at it. Other chemicals get down into the groundwater, get into the bedrock, and go low, hit groundwater, and spread all over a site. What's kind of fascinating about these chemicals, these pesticides, they don't go anyplace for decades. That's why we're testing at such shallow depths. If you dug deeper, you're going to find nothing. The depths, those few inches down, is where they were put, and that's where they went, and that's where they stayed for decades. It's very fascinating about them, how they don't go anyplace. They don't spread around a site. We've looked by the wetlands, and that's the pollutant mobility we spoke of. We checked around the site, and we found it around the building, where you typically would, someone who poured the chloridane or whatever around their barn or their house to keep the bugs, the ants, the vermin out over the years of farming. And that's correct, Mr. Soltis, is that correct? That, as I just described it, basically, in a non-technical kind of way?
That's also why we don't use these pesticides anymore. They're just far too persistent. They stick around forever.
And soil handling is important, and I want to emphasize something Mr. Soltis said. DEP, the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, allows you to take soils like this. Once we took the barn down, they would allow us to take any soils from around the house, around the barn, mix them with any other dirt on the site, and go from whatever ppm or pp parts per million, parts per billion we have now, dilute it with other soil and just leave it on the site. And that's something we don't do, that the authority and the corporation don't do. In this sense, we're going to have Mr. Soltis there to do the testing. We're going to have all that stuff taken off-site. We're not going to mix it, which we could do under the law. We're not going to mix it with any other soils. It'll be carted off-site to either Waterbury or upstate New York, where they dispose of these and burn them off correctly to get rid of the contaminants. And then we're bringing new soils back on the site. Again, Mr. Soltis' firm will be involved with that. And for the record, the Housing Authority and the corporation doesn't just accept dirt on site on any project. You can't just show up with a dump truck from any company, whether you're O&G to Joe's Dump Truck Service. from Bridgeport. You know, you could be the littlest company, the biggest company. We only take laboratory certified soil, so we know exactly what's coming on the site, so you don't get stuck with someone's dirty soil. That's been their practice, and that's going to be the practice before these recent developments in Fairfield. That was interesting because we had always planned as part of our plan, you just can't take soils from anywhere. You can't do that if you're doing a development. That's a terrible idea. And that's something that Mr. Soltis will confirm. We're going to be checking those soils to make sure we're only getting clean soils back on the site once we, if we have to add any soils to get the levels up for what's taken away. So is that correct, Mr. Soltis, again, with the bringing new soils on, they will be
Yes.
checked, certified that we've got clean soils with no, we're not taking someone else's contaminants on our property. And Mr. Soltis, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of certainty as to whether this project as proposed will adversely impact public health, safety, or welfare, or raise a substantial public safety issue?
We're improving the conditions by removing the pesticides. It's existing there today, and it's been there for quite some time. We're removing it, so we're improving the conditions.
So no adverse impact on any of that,
No.
correct? And do you have an opinion as to whether the development will protect the environment?
To the extent I'm involved, yes.
Thank you. It will protect it?
Yes.
And does anyone have any questions of Mr. Soltis before we conclude with him?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Finally, for our last witness, we're pleased to have worked with Michael Galante, who you're familiar with, at Frederick P. Clark and Associates, a traffic engineer with years of experience here in Fairfield, the town he lives in, who in fact is not only familiar with this area, he did the traffic study for Holland Hill School just up and across the street on behalf of the town itself. He studied the traffic impacts of the proposed residential community that we're building here on High Street, on the local road network, and he's concluded in his report that site traffic will be minimal and can safely be accommodated by the area roadways. And Michael was one of the first experts we retained in this project. We had many pre-designed meetings, and instead of bringing in Michael later, or any traffic expert in later, and say, tell us this works, we had him from day one saying, what do we need to do regarding parking? Where, how, sight lines, what parking is needed? And we wanted to have a safe and efficient design, and that's why. And we know that Michael would not testify if he didn't truly believe in something. And we had him look, and part of his report and his supplemental report actually looks at Pine Tree, and that's why Ms. Martin commented on the numbers of actual vehicles parked at Pine Tree, because it's going to be a similar population. All of the one-bedroom units on this project are first-floor units, and that's important, because not only are they first-floor units, they're all handicapped accessible units at the same time, handicapped equipped units on the first floor, and that matters with traffic counts. So Mike went out there repeatedly to Pine Tree to look at the number of cars, to see what ratio we used at Pine Tree, where he was involved, and to see how many cars actually are owned by the residents and how many spaces are available. So Michael, I'll call upon you to...
Thank you, and good evening. Mike Galante, Frederick Clark Associates. And just for the record, Pine Tree, we actually did the traffic work for that a couple years ago, so obviously we're very familiar with it. What I'd like to do tonight is just give you an overview of the traffic report, the analyses, the findings, and the process we went through. And all the graphics I'm showing tonight are in the report itself, so there's nothing new. And then I did do a supplemental letter that covered a couple things. One was sight lines, and two was a chart that we do here in Fairfield that talks about the increase in traffic as it relates to site traffic against traffic volumes on roads such as High Street. That's in that letter also. This is a graphic figure 2 from our report that simply shows the site in reference to High Street, Wilton Road, High Lawn Road is right about here. This is the site in question for tonight. We did traffic counts out on the road. In March of this year, schools were open, of course. Weather conditions were good. And we collected this traffic data at the 2 intersections near the site frontage on High Street at Wilton Road and at High Lawn Road. Obviously, the morning peak period, again in the afternoon. We compared this traffic data to the counts we did nearby for the Holland Hill School because we knew that'd be a question, and we compared the data. And in this case, this being a residential proposal, a residential development proposal, we always focus on the typical commuter peak periods as it relates to residential. When we did Holland Hill, of course, we looked at the school peaks as arrivals in the morning and departures in the afternoon at dismissal time, so slightly different time periods. The morning overlaps. Commuter traffic and school traffic is essentially around the same time, 7:45 to 8:45 in the morning. I'm sorry, 7:15 to 8:15 in the morning. We counted actually 7 to 9. In the afternoon, we counted from 3 to 6 p.m. Again, school dismissals around 2:45. Commuters, as far as coming home from work, typically occurs 5 to 6 o'clock, although everyone here tonight is not home yet. We looked at the volumes. Volumes in general are around 350, 380 vehicles on High Street. I have a chart for that. I'm good. This is a chart from the report that just kind of summarizes the data. Table 1, High Street itself has about 350 to 380 vehicles during a peak hour. This is, I'll call it the commuter peak. The afternoon commuter peak is 4:45 to 5:45 in the afternoon. The morning is the earlier time period I mentioned, 7:15 to 8:15. The side streets, Wilton Road has about 35 vehicles in the morning. These are two-way volumes, by the way. In the afternoon, it had 13 vehicles as far as the actual traffic counts. High Lawn has a much lower volume, 17 vehicles in the morning. This is at the High Street intersection, and 9 vehicles in the afternoon. That, of course, goes into the model as far as analyses as we go through a process of before and after. Excuse me. Next step, of course, to look at accident data. In this case, we obtained the accident data from the Fairfield Police Department. We always go a 3-year period, 2016 through 2018, along High Street itself at each of the intersections. And you'll see from this chart, there was one accident generally in front of the site between the two side streets, Wilton and High Lawn. There was one accident where a motorist actually hit a fixed object, meaning they likely drove off the road, hit a tree, hit a stone wall. I don't remember exactly, but that was the only accident. There were no accidents, no reported accidents anyhow, as far as at the intersections near the site, both being T intersections. High Street, of course, has the right-of-way. Side streets generally have the stop sign control. Next step was to look at, well, what would this development generate as far as traffic? And before I talk about site traffic, there are no other major traffic generators in the area, of course, except for the school expansion, which we included in the volumes at these intersections. This development is proposed to be a 40-unit, what we consider low-rise residential development. Standards followed by every town, state of Connecticut, from the ITE Trip Generation Handbook that I've mentioned many times, estimates that this type of development will generate 20 trips during the morning peak hour. This is a 1-hour period, and 26 trips during the afternoon peak. That's inbound, outbound totals. Of course, in the morning, majority of the residents are leaving for work or school. In the afternoon, a majority of the residents are coming home into the site itself. Interesting, this shows it the reverse, so I have to check that, but it's definitely 26 trips during the peak hour. We add this traffic to the roadway system. It's generally a 40-60 split on High Street itself, northbound and southbound, and we add that traffic on top of what we call a no-build traffic condition, which includes the traffic related to the Holland Hills school expansion and a general growth rate. Next step is looking at traffic conditions before and after, levels of service, delay, and so on. And it's table 4 from the traffic report. And I won't go through all the numbers, but what this simply does, it shows the analysis of a stop sign controlled intersection during each of the peak hours for existing conditions, a no-build condition and a 2021 year condition, and then a 2021 build condition, which adds the traffic to the roadway system, the 20 trips in the morning and the 26 trips in the afternoon. We add that traffic to the roadway system itself. We do a before and after condition. The difference between the two, between the no build and build, is essentially the impact, the measured impact. And from that information, we make a determination, is mitigation needed? For example, different type of traffic control, adding lanes if you were doing different types of project. In this case, the levels of service are A to B, which are, just like in school, A is great, B is almost as good. In traffic engineering, it's very little delay as far as delay measured at each of the approaches to the intersections themselves. We, of course, do the driveway in a future condition, and we'll talk about the driveway location and so on in a second. But essentially, this shows, and I've used this word before, Sometimes I get in trouble, but it's what we consider in traffic engineering an insignificant impact, meaning there's not a high volume of traffic being added to the roads that has a result that needs to be mitigated in any fashion. So that's essentially what this table shows. Next step is to look at the driveway location. There was, I think, some discussion about that, I guess, at the October 15th meeting. I forget the date. And we said we would talk about it tonight. I was, I guess, one of the first consultants that headed onto this project. Often we're the last, and we have a deadline. But the object here was to look at the frontage of the site itself, which is obviously limited to a frontage, property lines and so on, a farmhouse that everyone wanted to preserve, and in my role, where should the driveway go? And there was a lot of discussion about that with the civil engineer and our office and everyone else as far as that location. And the placement of the driveway was south of the existing home, which would remain in place. But that results in an offset driveway to a T intersection that's across the road on High Street itself. The reason why the driveway is where it is, one is it maximizes our sight distances in each direction, northbound, southbound on High Street, and I'll get into that in a minute. It provides us with the method of measuring sight distances, not going over someone's front lawn that's not your property, that's not in your control, placing it where we actually were able to save the house, the farmhouse, and we have the separation between Wilton Road to the north, our driveway, and High Lawn to the south. And so we took great care in that as far as that location. Now the concern was, and I was asked this question more than once, is it okay to put the driveway offset from Wilton Road? And the reason why I said yes is simply because, one, the volume of traffic coming out of Wilton Road today is very low, and the volume of traffic coming out of our proposed driveway in the future is very low. Meaning there's not a large conflict between the two streets as far as how they operate in a future condition when the site driveway is in place. The placement of the driveway, and as I mentioned, sight distances. Measuring sight lines and sight distances, we measure speed. In this case, on High Street itself. We typically do this. We don't do it during peak hours. We do it typically off-peak when the speeds are typically a little bit higher. And we measure, it's posted for 30 miles per hour on High Street today. The speeds, and this is table 6, that actually is an updated table in the letter, because the table in the report was actually not a complete table. It was before the data was actually summarized. And I apologize for that. I realized that after the 15th when we were here last. What we found is the speed, the speed is 25 miles an hour, not 30. For 25 miles per hour, we need a distance of about 280 feet of sight distance, someone coming out of a driveway and looking either northbound or southbound on High Street itself. The speeds, of course, were not 25, but they were 34 and 31, so we used a higher number, and we generally find that we need a sight distance of about 375 feet in each direction. We actually 240 and 375. The measured sight distance out in the field is 400 feet. So we certainly meet the criteria, and then a little bit more for as far as the sight distance needed at the proposed driveway. Another step in the process of locating a driveway and determining that it's an appropriate location for it. And I must say a lot of detail and a lot of analysis and discussions went into this. So this is table 6 in the report itself, and actually updated in the chart, in the letter. Last, and these were prepared by Mr. Baker as far as the site engineer and the site work and so on. But in the most recent letter, I submitted a plan which was an updated sightline analysis. And the reason for the update is that looking to the south from the proposed driveway, the sightline was actually drawn just slightly over the adjacent properties. I'll call it the front lawn. So in other words, it's private property adjacent to our property as far as the site itself. And that's something we really shouldn't do, because if I own the property next door, I could put up a fence tomorrow on the property line and block our sight distance coming out of a driveway. So we remeasured it and rechecked it, and the difference between the first one and the second one is very simply state criteria, state standards. I wouldn't say it's criteria, but what we follow as a guideline is you measure 15 feet back from the edge of pavement, in this case onto your driveway, and that's where you look northbound and southbound on High Street to get your sight distance of the 375 feet that you need. What we have here, accommodate for the adjacent property that, this is a very narrow frontage, if you will, from a sightline analysis in the location of a driveway, is we're able to measure that same 15 feet back from the edge of shoulder line back onto the driveway. So there's a difference of about 5 feet. And by doing that, we take our sightline out of the neighbor's private property. And that's the difference between the two. The town uses and follows state standards. I've spent a lot of time with the town engineer as far as measuring site distances over the last several years. And we've done this before in other locations in town. And the state will actually let us do this when it's appropriate to do it. So the site distances from the driveway location as proposed meet the standards based on speed, which is the appropriate way of doing it. The distance of 375 feet is based on state standards, based on that speed. It's not based on the posted speed limit, but based on what we call the 85th percentile speed of what most motorists are driving from that speed of 34, 35 miles an hour and below that. Yes, there is someone driving over that speed, but you don't design for that percentage of people driving over that actual speed. So we meet the sight lines. We recommend this driveway is controlled with a stop sign, stop bar. And I do recommend, although there's not much parking on High Street along this frontage in this whole area, that it'd be wise probably to have no parking along the frontage of the site. It's really the same condition with every side street along High Street, where you don't have no parking along the street of High Street to provide that site distance. But we're recommending it here as a new driveway to eliminate the parking. And based on what I've seen, is it doesn't really affect anyone that's parking on the street. And the last chart.
Is there parking on the street adjacent to the driveway entrance today?
Oh, sorry, I heard it back there.
Sorry, it's me.
There is parking permitted, but I've been bothered many, many times, and I'm sure someone will maybe disagree with me, but I really very rarely see cars parked on High Street in the vicinity of this site plan.
So, because we don't have authority, we can only make a recommendation.
True, we would go to the police commission.
If there are cars parked in legal parking spaces on the street adjacent to the driveway, will these sight lines be affected?
They're affected by a parked car, and depending on who you speak to, some would say that that parked car is a temporary condition and it doesn't block your sight distance. What we try to do is we try to remove that parking space to provide that sight line. And that's what we've done in most cases here in town.
Yeah, just recognizing that we don't have authority to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
And your recommendation is that the intersection or the driveway be controlled by a stop sign with a stop bar?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Mm-hmm. The ISD is the little thingy that you use to
It's the dot on the map?
right, to see that sight line?
Oh,
right?
as far as measuring it?
Yeah, what's it called? That unit that you put, 5 feet above however tall above the ground to see?
Well, I forgot the exact name, but just let me tell you how it's done from my point of view for a moment.
Yeah.
And then Mr. Baker could explain more if he has to. First, to measure a sight distance is measured 3.5 feet above grade
3.5, right?
to a point on High Street in the approaching lane
Yeah.
at 3.5 feet.
Right.
Another measure is stopping sight distance, which is different calculation.
Yes, okay. So that beacon, 3.5 feet above the ground, that you put 15 feet from the pavement,
From the shoulder line.
yeah,
Yes.
and then you changed it. You went from
Well,
the shoulder line,
First was the curb line, and then we made it the shoulder line.
right?
Okay?
Where is that in relation to the proposed stop bar?
It's actually just in front of the stop bar. Now.
So
and
in
that's-
front meaning on the property side or towards the road side?
The dot?
Yeah, wherever
The
that.
dot is beyond the stop line going towards High Street.
Towards the road. So you're, as a car is on the property, approaching the stop sign, you come up to the little stop bar to get to the point where you're actually measuring this sightline distance.
Correct.
Now I've got to just edge forward, right, to the point where my eyes are going to be just in front of the stop bar, right?
The bumper of the car is in front of the stop bar. The driver's eye is actually behind the stop bar. Keep in mind the hood.
Yeah. I'm just trying to understand
Yeah.
where, because,
No, it's a perfectly legitimate question.
The
And also-
relationship.
And also keep in mind when most people stop, they don't necessarily stop at the stop bar. The front of the car is typically beyond the stop bar.
Right. So at that point where my eye is measuring that sight line, and I'm just in front of the bar, where's the front of the car? Is that
At the edge of the sidewalk.
the edge of the sidewalk?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Is there a sidewalk here?
I believe
Yes.
there is, yes, sure.
Right, okay. So you're taking out of the equation the possibility that there's a parked car on the side of the street. You're comfortable that a car exiting the property coming up to the stop bar is going to have this proper sight distance without coming into conflict with some oncoming traffic?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, certainly, you're viewing all the activity on the High Street in the travel lane. The northbound one is the most important because it's next to you.
Mhm.
That's kind of, as you come out of the driveway, the cars exiting the driveway is certainly behind that travel lane, without a doubt.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're actually sitting on the driveway and then measuring and looking, northbound and southbound.
Very good.
Okay. Just have one more chart to show. Last, as far as parking at Pine Tree, I've driven by there many, many, many times in the last several months. And this is a sample that was actually in the report. It's labeled, no, wrong one. Maybe I didn't bring it. No table number. But this is actually in the text of the report itself. What we did, and I did all of these, and there were actually more than this as far as listed. But these are the dates, times. This shows all PMs and evenings. I was actually out there in the mornings and sometimes on weekends. It's 50 units at Pine Tree. It's 60 parking spaces, and the number of cars parked would typically, on average, between 23 and 25 cars parked in the 60 spaces. What this shows, kind of getting to the punchline, and then we can backtrack a little bit, is it came out to 0.58 spaces per unit as far as parking demand. It's kind of a simplified parking demand study.
Mm-hmm.
And what this tells us, is, first of all, I saw all the same cars sometimes in the same space at the parking lot there. But the parking lot is about half empty almost all the time, no matter what time of day or evening. I purposely went there late at night, for example. Your greatest parking demand is at night at a residential development. Everyone's theoretically home, the cars are parked, and you're sleeping or whatever it might be. But what we found consistently was that the parking demand at this development was about half occupied. Half the spaces were occupied, the other half were empty consistently. That was morning, afternoon, evening, in many cases late evenings. I was there on Sunday mornings, for example. I was there late at night. On Saturday, my wife was starting to wonder why I was driving across town all the time. But that was the purpose of it, to give you a basis, and for our assistance also to better understand the parking demand for this type of residential development. What we propose on High Street is essentially the same type of parking demand. And our development on High Street has 50 spaces. I know my report said 46, I believe, in the cover letter. Okay. That's a summary. A little simpler than Carol's presentation tonight, so I like following her. I'm going to bring her along to my next night, my meeting tomorrow night in a different town. But that's the summary, and I can certainly answer any questions you have now or in January. Okay.
Anybody else have any questions? Very good. Thank you.
One of the reasons we had Mr. Galante look at the actual numbers at Pine Tree, he presented Pine Tree, some of you may remember on the commission, and gave us the analysis as to the number of spaces we would need based upon this type of a project, this type of a residential, and it being an affordable housing project with residents like we have there, as the same residents will have on High Street. And then we asked him just to double check and say, to show you we're right, and actually even less than we thought. And we were very conservative when we did the Pine Tree. And
if I may, the original analysis, Pine Tree was based on the ITE parking standards for residential development. So that obviously was very conservative, but this type of residential development.
Mr. Galante, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of certainty as to whether this project, as proposed, will adversely impact public health, safety, or welfare, or raise a substantial public safety issue?
Based on all our analyses, traffic counts analyses, accident studies, and sightlines, no, I don't see any issue as far as concerns with the results or impacts from this development.
Thank you, Mr. Galante. Again, are there any questions of Mr. Galante?
No.
Hearing none, we have no further experts to present this evening or reports at this time, but we have the entire team of experts here, the engineers as well. If anyone has any questions of any of them, they are available to you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the commission at this time.
Okay.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. So the applicant now,
One question for Attorney Leclerc.
Yes, sir.
We have a November 8th letter from the Community and Economic Development.
Affordable Housing Committee, yes. That's actually from the Affordable Housing Committee. For some reason,
Yes,
that's the
it
letterhead
is.
they used. Yes, I
Yes,
don't.
it is.
Yeah.
Their last bullet point, I thought I had remembered you from your at the last hearing saying, if this is approved, if you consider this project being approved and every other project that we have currently approved, we would meet the moratorium level. What is it called? Housing equivalency points?
That's correct.
Okay. It seems like their bullet point, unless I'm missing it, disagrees with that.
Well, the moratorium is 433. Right now, there's 53.5 by other projects that have been approved already and are in development in Fairfield. So if you take the 334 plus the 53, that's 380 out of 430, and this will give 70.5.
Oh, so the 334 does not include the 70.5.
That's my understanding. Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I'm also reading that though a little bit differently. I didn't expect it to meet it, but with another 53 represented by projects under development. So the 53.5 is already approved and under development?
That's my understanding, that those are approved and under development, yes, but they don't get the points until they actually have someone with the key in their hand walking in the
Right.
unit. So the points don't work, because you can get an approved project and never build it, I suppose.
No, but it's 70.5 plus 334 plus 50, okay.
That's my understanding, yes. And that's what they've told us verbally as well. That this
But even built with a CO, right? Don't you have to have a tenant in the?
Yeah, I think you need a key in the hand of someone, built and some tenant walking in there. Yes, sir. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, well then, I will, the applicant rests now, and, I mean, if there are members of the public that wish to be heard tonight, you're certainly free to, come up and speak, but we will be continuing this hearing until January 13th, at which time, we will continue with public comment. 14th, January 14th? Sorry if I got that date wrong. Sorry.
Hi, my name's Kathleen Tugas. I never spoke before, so if I do something wrong,
No worries.
I'm upset, I'm confused, I feel misled, there's no transparency, and I'm not understanding how this historic home in a family neighborhood, mostly one-family houses, could be set up. So I started to think. I came to the last meeting, and I heard Brian talk about, Attorney Leclerc talk about trifle, which is beautiful, but it's not the same thing, and it's not the same neighborhood. So again, I'm thinking, what if it doesn't go through? What would they do then? So I call up in Hartford, Commission of Appeals. They call me back. They said to me, if you have the 10%, then you don't have, I'm nervous.
No, that's okay. Take your time.
If you have the 10%, they can't use the 830G. So then I went to go look for Affordable Housing Committee. I couldn't find anybody. So then I started to look online, and it never mentioned, which is supposed to be included, that there's a RAP program that has 7 people with vouchers that come into Fairfield, that live in Fairfield. That's part of the 10%. They didn't add it. There's veterans, they haven't added. There's a lot of things that they haven't added. Why we should be here in the first place, I don't know. Then he had me look at 830G1A. The decision is necessary to protect substantial public interest in health, safety, and other matters, which the commission may consider, and then B, such public interest is clearly outweighs the need for affordable housing. Okay, so I read that. I didn't do a traffic study. I called the transportation department at Fairfield. I said to the girls that do the route busing, how many stops you got on High Street, between High Street, up High Street, between Jennings and Judd? We only have 4. I said, oh, okay. I said, how much traffic, how many buses use it for the route? 70. Then they said that on Judd, there's 30. That's high. She says, that's not including the parents that drive or the walkers. If you add 40 more kids, that's town resources. You know who pays them? Taxpayers, homeowners. Not renters, homeowners. We foot the bill. He wanted to know where we were going to put the employees that are going to be coming to work. Didn't we just foot the bill for the railroad station so they could come in and out? I don't understand. I didn't go to Yale. I don't have a huge degree, but I have a lot of common sense. And this makes no sense. That's all.
Thank you very much for your comments. Does anyone else wish to be heard?
Can you hear me now? Okay. Alex Durrell, 64 Woodcrest Road, RTM 3. I've been fortunate enough to have lived around the corner from 980 High Street for over 10,000 days, 30 years this month. I walked my children to Holland Hill School and have almost daily walked my dogs past that landmark, literally tens of thousands of times. And I've picked and eaten raspberries there, as have many wildlife. As members of the Town Planning and Zoning, you have accepted a responsibility to rationally protect Fairfield's growth, which includes housing and affordable housing in Fairfield, which was strongly supported by my mom, former First Selectwoman Jackie Durrell. My family supports affordable housing in a respectful, responsible way. As a member of the Durrell Wildlife Conservation, I was pleased and proud to be present with the Conservation Committee's decision to reject the structure of the application currently in front of you. The Conservation Committee, like the Durrell Wildlife Conservation, exists because places like 980 High Street need to be environmentally and safely utilized or protected, not financially optimized. I hope that as members of the TPZ, you use this power wisely to protect and prioritize this location over this potentially environmentally unsafe, overpopulated, overdensified, shoehorned, man-made hazard that couldn't, shouldn't, and wouldn't be better than what many current stakeholders living in the 980 High Street neighborhood and throughout town feel would be more appropriate and beneficial to our hometown. I don't see how this current proposal is safely or environmentally benefiting all living creatures in Fairfield. Please protect it and put Fairfield first so that it can last. Let us go forward together. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments.
I'd like to wait and pontificate at the next meeting instead of so late at night, but I'd like to raise 2 procedural issues going back to what you said at the beginning. One is that we went through the wetlands application, which was also split into multiple meetings. The applicant came forward in the last meeting with about 500 pages of documentation that the public had not seen. We had no opportunity to respond to that. There's 60 days between now and the next meeting. I'd like you to please ask the applicant not to submit last-minute documents that the public doesn't have a fair opportunity to cover.
I appreciate that, Mr. Reber. Thank you very much for your comments. I'll note that we got a revised affordable housing plan this evening, right?
I think that's very unfair.
Like, you know, I don't have the opportunity to review that and compare it against my notes from our discussions at the last meeting or the comments that were put forth by the Affordable Housing Committee. And I just put it aside because I was paying attention to the people who came to speak to me and us and show me boards and walk me through plans and everything. And I'm not sure when I was supposed to look at that if we were going to conclude the hearing tonight. So
Thank
your point is well taken.
I appreciate your concern for the public. My second point is, I think it's important to look here at whether or not this application meets the 830G criteria in one area. Your extended discussion about state versus federal income. There's a $7,000, approximately a $7,000 discrepancy between the top of the federal standard or the state standard and the area median income. So that I think it's important to find out from the applicant, does a family of four making approximately $82,000 a year, are they eligible for an affordable unit at this location? Because that's above the amount that their funding comes from, but it's required by 830G. So I think you don't have a valid 830G application here if a family of four making, it's around 82,000. Unless they can get an affordable unit here, to me, this is not a valid 830G application. So I think that's something that you should establish, hopefully before the next meeting.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We tried to establish that with the request for a chart, a
Well,
grid.
if you think you got it, and I didn't get it, you know what I mean? I don't understand it.
Yeah, very good.
Thirdly, I haven't heard anything about the text amendments. And I think procedurally now, the applicant's limited to rebuttal, correct?
Yes, the applicant closed.
Okay. So, you know, the text amendment issue here seems uncovered. And just finally, I'd like to thank all of you for your service the past 2 years. Some of you have run for office, which is no easy thing to do. And we really appreciate the way you deal with the public. I wish the other two commissioners had been here, and I hope the new people coming in will meet the standard that you guys have set for the prior 2 years. It's greatly appreciated.
No, thank you. Thank you for your comments. Any other members of the public wish to be heard? Come on up.
Good evening. My name is Lisa Havey. I live at 216 Longview Avenue. Been a resident there for over 21 years. I'm also a member of the RTM in District 6, which the Judd Estate is located in. My kids went to Holland Hill, and I'm quite a patriot to this town, and I believe in its abilities. First of all, I'd like to ditto everything that Alex Durrell said. Couldn't agree with him more. So I'm not going to say everything he said. What I am going to say is address how this project has been, it's going to look beautiful. It's going to have all these wonderful amenities. You won't be able to tell which one's affordable and which one's not. I'm just want to say that all of the amenities, all of the counters, all of the toilets, all of the trim, all of it, it's too much. It's way too much for this property. It doesn't belong in this neighborhood, that volume. Affordable housing belongs all over Fairfield in every neighborhood. But the gross size of this is inappropriate, and I'll leave it at that. I thank you very much for your service. And I urge you, please, some of you won't be here, some new people will be here, but I'm going to ask that you deny this application and this use of land. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wish to be heard? Okay. Going once. Public comment is going to, would you like to speak? Okay. I think that might be the first time anybody's taken me up on my going once, going twice.
Thank you very much. My name is Paula Gallo. I live at 23 Beacon View Drive. And the question that I have is why, of all the new construction that was done at Pine Tree Apartments, why is that grandfathered in, and why does not count toward the quota?
It does, Pine Tree.
I have read otherwise, that it doesn't count to the quota. Is that, am I correct or incorrect on that? To the quota for the state mandate.
Right. No, I believe that we are receiving qualified housing points, whatever the term, exact term is.
Is that correct?
For Pine Tree. Yeah, no, so you can confirm that with staff, with the Affordable Housing Committee after the meeting, but I believe that's the case. We don't have enough points to meet the minimum for a moratorium at this time, and we do not have 10% affordable housing under the state calculations to be exempt from the 830G statute at this time.
I'm aware of that. I'm just wondering, I've read a bunch of different things, and I have read that Pine Tree is not included in the quota. So I'm just wondering what's correct and what's not correct. So who can give me that answer to the question directly, or where can I find that?
You can, after the meeting, I'm sure she'll be happy to talk your ear off if you like, okay? Okay, any other members of the public wish to be heard? Okay, so I'm going to adjourn the hearing. I'm leaving this open to be continued on January 14th, 2020. Can't believe I just said that. And I will adjourn the meeting.